All right, so we all love Ben Shapiro, but when we all celebrate some point that he made, could we at least celebrate something fine that he said? Major conservative websites are heaping gratuitous praise on Ben for this transgender exchange he had last week at Ferris University. From Town Hall, Ben Shapiro takes transgenderism and pro-abortion arguments to the woodshed. From Louder with Crowder, boom, Ben Shapiro lays waste to vapid leftist and transgender debate. The headline of the Daily Caller was more moderate. Ben Shapiro uses age to counter transgender argument. Why aren't you 60? But its story begins. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro used age to blow holes in the transgenderism argument during a recent appearance at Ferris State University in Big Rapids, Michigan. As we'll see, the age argument is not even a good argument against transgenderism. The other McCain had, at Ben Shapiro destroys university students' bogus transgender ideology. There were many lesser websites and YouTube videos that had headlines glorifying the exchange as well, but here's the thing. They're all wrong. The only people Ben impressed were his fans. There is no transgender person or SJW that cares at all what Ben said except that they might consider him to have been mocking them. That's because he didn't really make any good arguments. Now, this is not really that much of a criticism of Ben himself, since it doesn't seem like he's the one who is promoting all these things as so great. On the other hand, these are criticisms of Ben because I want people to know that we could really do a much better job opposing the left in speech. Everybody thinks they oppose the left, but they don't all. If these comments from Ben pass as great criticisms of the left, then please, people, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that we can step up our game. The left is worthy of actually being opposed, not just of laughing at them among ourselves. Many of our so-called criticisms of the left are really just for our enjoyment. If you understand how a leftist sees the world, you understand that so much of what we say doesn't seem close to being a good point to them. Ben's transgender comments are a great example. Some of his comments, like about transgender suicide, are fine. I'm going to deal with the ones that are objectionable. So, Ben takes a question from a chick about transgender, and they begin by discussing whether or not gender is a social construct.
So, how do you say that some people don't have privilege when you basically just said that trans people aren't valid? They're not a thing. They're just girls pretending to be boys or boys pretending to be girls.
Okay.
Like, okay.
Oh, someone's excited. Okay.
That's biological, but gender is a completely different thing.
No, gender is not disconnected from sex. So.
It's not completely disconnected, but it's still a cultural thing. It's still from society. It's
okay. No, it is not in the mind. Okay.
Ben says gender isn't in the mind, but actually, the chick said that gender is still a cultural thing. It's still from society. And then you could barely hear her say in the mind when Ben picks the most self-serving of her choices to pounce on because it would be easiest for him, and he never addressed gender being cultural or belonging to society. So here's what is meant when people say that gender is a social construct, or here is the best case that can be made for gender being a social construct. You know, we are supposed to make the best case for people's views, right? Before we reject them. I happen to have some quotes handy that I like from Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics that I used for another video. That's right. I'm going to use Thomas Sowell to explain that gender is a social construct. So, in those times and places where physical strength and stamina have been the principal work requirements, productivity and pay have tended to reach their peak in the youthful prime of life, with middle-aged laborers receiving less pay or less frequent employment, or both. A premium on physical strength likewise favored male workers over female workers. And then the rising importance of skills and experience relative to physical strength has changed the relative productivities of youth compared to age and of women compared to men. This has been especially so in more recent times as the power of machines has replaced human strength in industrial societies and as skills have become crucial in high-tech economies. So, gender is a social construct because men and women have related in radically different ways throughout history, despite having the same biological relationship. Oh, but those are gender roles, not gender per se. I agree, but gender roles are an attribute of gender, and the point is that industry has ushered in a large degree of gender equality. The reason why there wasn't a class of people advocating for gay rights in the ancient world is because women were often pretty much slaves. They weren't good for much more than having children and domestic work, and so why wouldn't a man take a wife? And why wouldn't a woman take a husband? Granted, in some societies, they could have a lot of power within their household, but that was usually the limit of their ambition. And by usually, I mean pretty much all the time. People radically downplay the extent to which gender inequality drove the sexes together. A side point, I know about ancient male homosexuality, and to my knowledge, those men took wives too, because why wouldn't they? And I believe those were the wives that lived in the worst conditions. So the point is that industry has ushered in ever increasing gender equality. Actually, Karl Marx said this would happen in the Communist Manifesto. Industry has ushered in this equality specifically because the physical differences between men and women are increasingly less and less relevant in the workplace and in life in general. Whether or not they know it, SJWs take this development and assert that physical characteristics are so irrelevant that being a man or a woman is really a persona. That it is a psychological condition. Of course, this fails because even if men and women are less distinguished by physical strength, they are still distinguished in society by psychological factors that result from their physical attributes. For instance, even if someone believes that they don't want to have children, they necessarily have the knowledge that if they are a man, they can probably have a child probably into their 60s, but if they are a woman, they had better do it by their early 50s at the latest, but she probably doesn't want to wait until then. These facts loom large over all life that is capable of first world problems, even if people don't always have it on their mind. Another easy one is that women menstruate. I have been told by women that menstruation it more or less runs their entire life. And so my point is, why do we get so hard over transgender responses that obviously leave SJWs with the feeling of, oh, well, my SJW professor knows better than him? Does anyone really think that what Ben Shapiro said had any effect other than entertaining his fans? Eventually, he proceeded with what I'll call mocking this chick and about why she can't change her age. Here, I'll let you check that part out.
Let me ask you this. Okay, I won't ask you how old. I will ask you how old you are, okay? Because you're young enough that it's probably not insulting to ask you. So.
I'm 22, so I'm probably gonna be naive, right?
No. Why aren't you 60? Why aren't you 60?
Is it?
And why can't you identify as 60? What is the problem with you identifying as 60?
Because it's not the same as gender. You can't just.
You're right. Age is significantly less important than gender.
I see this, and I'm over here thinking, has Ben really thought this through? If I hadn't read quite a lot about this subject, I would think that maybe this SJW professor, does know more about it than Ben. The reason why transgender is taken seriously and not trans age is because whereas industry has ushered in gender equality, it has also ushered in radical age inequality. Now that so much work is done with machines, age or experience has never been so important to productivity, and gender has never been so not important. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills here. People think these were actually good points, and major conservative websites ran with this exchange. This exchange was weak tea, folks. If there really is an SJW professor that can make the arguments I'm making here, and I suspect that all it would take is some sort of Marxist, since Marxism is certainly where I first learned of the relation between gender and industry, then that professor might really do well in a debate with Ben on this subject. Ben was pretty much mocking this woman, and he thinks he's so much better than Milo. I guess I should grant that Ben's mocking this girl would be tame for Milo, but still. Anyway, I am not as hostile to transgenderism as Ben is, but I'm not nearly an SJW about it. I am satisfied to call such a person he or she depending on how they identify. I'm not sure how I feel about the boutique pronouns like je and zer. I am inclined to believe that there are people who would live happier lives if they were to transition. But I suspect that these people are the ones sober enough to admit that rather than becoming a man or a woman, they became something like a man or something like a woman. They became a trans man or a trans woman. If they can't admit this, I suspect that they will be haunted by the truth for the rest of their lives, if not in their conscious, then in their subconscious and in their dreams. Just think of the examples I gave about psychological differences between men and women. A person may be better off living life as the opposite sex, but they simply can't utterly become that sex. That is why we call them trans. Consider Consider what Plato alternately calls the true lie, or the lie of the soul in his Republic. His Socrates says that a true lie is a lie that someone believes about the most important things in life. He says that no one voluntarily accepts such a lie, and that people hate such a lie most of all, and fear holding such a lie more than anything. Let's consider one controversial issue, abortion. Both sides cannot be right about abortion, so one side has blood on their hands, or the other is attempting to commit injustice against women. Each side, understandably, tends to be opposed to considering the prospect of having such horrible views. This is a fine example of why I think the prospects are much better for the trans person that can say that they are like a man or like a woman. Compared to the alternative, they won't have to avoid the question of how they relate to biological men and biological women, and it seems to me that their life will be much easier. So, I'm going to wrap this up because I don't want this to become a whole critique or explanation of transgender theory. A last point, I certainly do believe that there are people that transition hastily and because of poor advice, and I consider that to be a great tragedy. Like I've said, I consider the standard to be whether a person would be happier having transitioned. I mean, as a matter of psychological health. And I do believe that way too many people are being encouraged to do it, and I believe they are being encouraged on the false premise that they will actually become a man or a woman, whereas they can only become something like a man or something like a woman. If someone is fine with that, and I know some people are, then I am inclined to be fine with it. But as for you right-wingers, don't you know we're fighting the left over here? We aren't just entertaining ourselves. Shape up. Why don't we make arguments that SJWs might actually consider? Why don't we accept their premises to the extent they are acceptable, even if just for the sake of an argument? Gender is a social construct. Get over it. But it's not a social construct in the way they learned in their gender studies classes. Once we are arguing with them about how gender is a social construct, and not whether it is, we are on their intellectual turf, on the grounds of their premises. And we will actually be able to attack those premises instead of just mocking them and entertaining all of our friends. When we're on their turf, we can have an argument and present ourselves as compassionate. People don't hate me because I mock them. People hate me because they can't stand debating me, because I accept their premise and I make it my own. Oh, and by the way, SJWs, if you can't compromise with what I've said here, then you may believe a bunch of lies about the most important things in life. I think society should provide some people with a way to live as though they are the opposite sex, but that doesn't mean that they are actually the opposite sex. This is me trying to compromise with you, but I know you will only hear hate and this won't sound like compromise. That's how you got Trump. You're my real target. I just want these right-wingers to shape up to help oppose all of you so that we may actually be able to defeat you rhetorically and vindicate justice and what is right.